Hi, everybody. As everybody's starting to enter the room, I'm just going to give it about a minute before we start into the webinar. Just as an introduction and reminder, this is our HCD webinar series, something that we've been doing for the past few years now, where we've been gathering panels of experts, people that are smarter than us, which is the best thing you can always do is have friends that are smarter than you and bring them together to talk about topics that are, things that we all want to know about, or we would like to hear from the experts about. So for example, today's discussion is about consumer cannabis and the consumer cannabis industry, in particular, the challenges that have come with it. So today, that's what we will be focusing on. And again, I'm going to give it just a little bit of time as people start to join us. The webinar will be about an hour long, and so we'll be very excited to have all of our panelists speak, and you will have an opportunity to ask them questions as well. So again, in the HCD webinar series, today we're going to be focusing on consumer cannabis challenges, both in consumer research, R&D development, and just in the industry in general. So very much happy to have our expert panelists join us, and so very happy that you can join us as well. To give a little bit of an overview and introduction, today's webinar on consumer cannabis and industry challenges. Today, just a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, welcome everybody. So glad you can join us. You will want to maybe chat with us using the chat function or the Q&A if there's a question you want to ask. The Q&A is more private so that the whole group can't see maybe what you're asking, but we will be able to see your questions and we will try to address them as best that we can. So feel free to use that function. I'm also going to introduce the panelists momentarily. And just to give an overview of what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to start off with trying to get on the same page, just with some industry basics. And then the panel will go over different topics on the different challenges that are in business, development, and in research for the cannabis industry. And also we're going to prompt them to talk a little bit about what they see in the future for this space. So again, use the Q&A or the chat to interact with us or to ask any of the panelists any specific questions. Now, later on, we'll be really happy to have you check out the recording. We will be posting it on our YouTube, but also feel free to tweet with us. Any thoughts that you might have, you can see our Twitter handle below, as well as visit our website. We'll be posting related stuff there as well. So just to launch right into things, consumer cannabis is really a new frontier. It's got all the innovative products that we're seeing all across this different CPG sectors. And with that, you get a new set of opportunities, which is great, but it also brings in a lot of new complications. So this rapid speed that we're seeing in consumer cannabis as it's growing is paralleled with industry changes, constant new regulations, untapped territories, and the need for consumer research is really a massive undertaking. It's the world's most commonly cultivated, trafficked, and used drug. And as the push for legalization in the US and abroad grows, cannabis is garnering significant attention from investors, manufacturers, and researchers. Despite being illegal and under federal law in the US, it is estimated at $13.6 billion in 2019, with 340,000 jobs devoted to the handling of plants, according to New Frontier data. A total of 35 states in the District of Columbia have legalized cannabis for medical use, 16 of which allow adults to legally use the substance for recreational use as of April this year. And that numbers are going to continue to grow as more people become more accepting of the idea across the US and around the world. So no industry may be growing faster than consumer cannabis, with big strides made in this legalization and the growth of the business and industry in general. From CPGs to pharmaceuticals to food, everyone is racing to claim their position in this rapidly evolving market. So in an industry that has been vexed with, complex, often conflicting regulations. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, Amin.
Okay, if you can go ahead and go on mute for now, though, I'm just doing the introduction.
Sorry about this.
No problem. So running a consumer cannabis research program does require specialized knowledge and expertise, from assessing efficacy and making claims to running consumer research and sensory testing. And the nuances around designing, implementing, and analyzing can certainly be very challenging. So from FDA to IRB to ASTM, navigating this new and sometimes wild frontier does present challenges that few R&D teams have had to face in their previous work. So while some of us have been learning the hard way through trial and error, learning on the fly, and lots of blood, sweat, and tears, the goal for this discussion is to bring these issues to light so that we can maybe help others to navigate these very new and difficult waters. So with that, I'm going to introduce the panelists that we will have today. And as I introduce you, feel free to bring your camera on and unmute yourselves so that everybody can see you. I'm going to start with Martha. Martha Bajek is Consulting Director of Health and Wellness here at HCD. She has spent the last decade or so working as a scientist and leader for some of the world's largest and most influential consumer packaged goods companies. She's principal at Bajek SenseWorks Consulting, and Martha lends her expertise and perspective to researchers and leaders across CPG categories. Her experience innovating in highly regulated spaces in particular ensures consideration of regulatory and compliance requirements in her designs. Palmina D'Amelio is Senior Manager of Sensory and Canopy Growth. As manager of the sensory program at Canopy, she has helped drive a new branch of innovations and the company towards its consumer-focused goals. Palmina and her team have built the sensory program at Cannabis from the ground up. So she's had a lot of experience in cannabis research across all product categories. Our very own Allison Gakowski is Global Research Director at HCD and has become our own in-house expert in the area of research compliance in the cannabis and hemp industry and really all active spaces. She manages our global research and client relations and brings to the table hands-on experience on some of the most pressing complications for consumer research in this field. Darwin Millard is the Spock of cannabis, and we're so happy to have him join us. Chief Science Officer in Canada of Final Bell Corp. Darwin is an active member of ASTM International's Technical Committee D37 on Cannabis, which is an international group dedicated to the development of voluntary consensus standards for the global cannabis hemp industry. He specializes in mechanical and solvent-based extraction methodologies. And for the past 15 years, Darwin has been focusing on the extraction and manufacture of nutraceutical products comprising of phytocannabinoids and other bioactive constituents from the cannabis plant. Yagoda Mazur is the Associate Vice President on Sensory Science for ACCE International. With close to 30 years of experience in the field of sensory and consumer sciences, Yagoda's professional career has included positions in leading consumer product companies in Europe and North America, and brings experience in navigating the consumer research hurdles in cannabis and hemp space. So I'm very happy to have all these people join us. Please come off of mute so everybody can see you. They can't see you if you're on mute. And I believe Darwin might still be struggling a little bit with his camera. I'm not sure, but we'll go ahead and that's okay. We'll go ahead and start the conversation. Maybe we can find a way to fix that in the meantime. But for everybody who's joining this call, please use the Q&A or the chat features to join us in the conversation. So with that, I'm going to stop the share of my screen so that we can see everybody or see most of us, and hopefully we'll be able to get Darwin on. Otherwise, Darwin, please use the hand thing so we can see if you have any thoughts that you want to include.
Of course.
Yeah. And so let's go ahead and get this started. And as I said before, we were going to talk about the basics first, terminology. And the reason I really wanted to start with this is because I think, one thing that we've discovered in a lot of our research at HCD is that the knowledge base of the average consumer is very little in this space, right? I mean, industry people throw around a lot of different terms. There's, CBD, there's terpenes, there's all sorts of terminology that we use. But even experienced consumers, that may not be the terminology that they use. They might use something a lot more colloquial, or, maybe some of the type of wording that we wouldn't use in industry, right? So let's talk first. What do we mean when we're talking about cannabis products?
I can
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Victoria.
I can speak from the consumer perspective and not from the big research perspective. So basically, any product which includes any amount of cannabinoids, either the most known CBD, THC, could be considered a cannabis product. Obviously, more cannabinoids are coming up, and there will be probably ongoing consumers education, but right now this is the common sense, I believe.
And Darwin, I see you have your hand up. If you want to add something to that.
Yeah, sorry, I figured I would just leave my picture icon up since I can't get my video to go. Sorry about that, everyone.
No worries.
So this is a really interesting question, right? Like, what is a cannabis product? Especially when, my point of view as a one plant solutionist, thinking that, there's really no difference between marijuana and hemp, et cetera, all those wonderful things, thinking 10, 20 years down the road when we won't be even seeing a delineation, right? Everything in my mind is a cannabis product, right? If it comes from a cannabis plant. But I think no, we're not quite there yet, right? So what we proposed in the D37, ASTM International's Technical Committee for Cannabis, is a term by the phrasing of a resin cannabis product. And we use that initial term resin, right, to help really distinguish this from the other types of cannabis products, like an industrial cannabis product, or a nutritional cannabis product, or a topical cannabis product. But I think even that usage is maybe too complicated, too far out there. And actually, I wholly
for a consumer.
Absolutely. 100% agree with Yogada. It's just make it way simpler. It's just, does it have cannabinoids in it or not?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's it. Yeah, is it a cannabis product? If you say cannabis, then is the plant involved somehow? Is it, are you extracting from the plant? There's only a few, I believe, still only a few preparations that are synthetic. If it has cannabinoids, whether they come from, hemp, or I want to just say cannabis hemp, so that we align that it's still cannabis.
Right.
Semantic.
It's semantics,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So then a question.
But, they're pretty serious about it too, right? So you can't just kind of toss away hemp because it's
But to
very
add to
large
that,
industry.
given what consumer perceptions are when it comes to different words, like just putting cannabis in any discussion about these products, whether it says CBD or it says cannabis or hemp or whatever it might be, people bring their own perceptions to that, as we found in our study, right, Martha? So for everybody who's not familiar, and we will be sharing it, we did do a study on consumer perceptions of warning labels that would go in these products, and we're happy to talk about that at some other time. But what does it mean to be intoxicating versus non-intoxicating? Because I think the second people see that something is a cannabis product, it probably brings to mind the idea that it could be intoxicating in some way.
Yeah, and that's fair. But I think that, in addition to like all these, so what defines whether it's active or non-active, I think we also have to talk about formats, right? Like how consumers are able to purchase their products. Far and above currently, and I believe always will be, flower is the most known format and the best, like, most consumers are still gravitating to flower. And then you have stuff like edibles, gummies, for instance, beverages,
More
different types of
manufactured
inhalables.
product.
Absolutely, which arguably then you can start to, I mean, arguably with the edibles and beverages, you can almost control the dosage there, right? So
Mhm.
you can almost say that you're going to get, on a higher end, you're going to get 10 milligrams THC, CBD, on a lower end, 5 milligrams, depending on the type of beverage edible you purchase. And I think they're almost, for a novice user, it's almost more user friendly to enter the segment using a beverage edible. But as a consumer, when you go to a dispensary and you want to start with flower, you're right, there's a lot of uneducation or lack of education there. And really, some bud tenders will say, well, this, try this, it's got high THC. And as a novice user, that may not be your starting point. They should not be your starting
So that's
point.
not completely unfamiliar territory when it comes to people in CPG, right? So when you're thinking, in food and beverage in particular, industry people that have been involved in alcohol, a different sort of industry. But, whether it's Scotch, which is a high hurdle because you have to know what it is, you have to know what you're looking for in Scotch. It's an acquired taste, right? Or maybe I think it's something Darwin's brought up, the idea of microbrews, that again, there's a knowledge base that people have that, when they know what an IPA is, or they know, different locations and all these different aspects. What is a sour? There's a whole knowledge base that people almost need. And I think that people in those industries have been really good about trying to educate people. Maybe that's one of the hurdles.
I totally agree with you, Michelle. I mean, even when you think about testing, we have a great example of alcohol testing, and we establish certain norms, protocols, and whether this industry is relatively new, and we're still working towards a clear understanding of certain norms and standards. And basically it puts the consumers at safety.
But there's also a limitation as to what can be said and what cannot be said, right? Like you cannot market a cannabis product the way you would market a tobacco or alcohol product. I mean, well, I guess more akin to tobacco than alcohol for sure. So it's very subtle, and you're using sort of your what's the word I'm looking for? Folks that are, you're using websites like a Reddit or something like that, or a Leafy, right? To start to kind of put your point across. Or are you subtly putting it on the label with 3 milligrams of 3% terpenes or something to that effect, and then it starts to be maybe a little bit more. There starts to be a little bit more nuance there, but again, there's that lack of education with respect to what a terpenes do. And then, sorry, Allison, and I just want to make this final point is that we also, again, your bud tender is what your only source of sort of truth and information to a certain degree. And, there's that thing where they, the big marketing piece there too is sativa indica, and that really holds no water, right? So we're pushing, or there's definitely a lack of education, and we're continuing to perpetuate the myths or the lack of education. Sorry, Allison.
And I just love kind of going back to the question of what is cannabis, and just taking a moment to realize that probably more than any other industry, that there becomes huge stigmas and or biases or preconceived perceptions about just simply that word and using that word, especially in different markets. So Canada has a very different perception in general, whether they're users or non-users of cannabis products, that have a very different perception of products that contain cannabis than, let's say, the US or the UK or somewhere in Europe. And just being very aware of that, because we're not playing on the same playing field, let's say, right? Because we have to deal with all of these biases. And I think just starting at the fundamental knowledge of what is it, there's this huge morality factor that some non-users have, and as the industry grows and we want to fold in new users into this space, by understanding what are they bringing to the table right now, and how can, through education, we help them get over any type of barriers they have, is going to be really, really important to growing this industry beyond people early adopters or have been using this for years.
Sure. I'll toss it over to Darwin.
Yeah, no, I was just I wanted to piggyback off of Allison, what was mentioned there, and the data you got back from your survey, which is very fascinating, right? The perceptions one's feel or get when they see the word or hear cannabis, right? And I have actually been kind of coining this new perception as the new reefer madness. You know, we no longer necessarily perceive cannabis as the evil boogeyman that's going to just have us do all the crazy things in the 20s and 30s that we're told about it. But now there's this stigma that hemp is good and safe, but cannabis or marijuana is bad and not safe.
Mm.
And that kind of connotations, those perceptions by the marketplace is what I have coined for, hashtag new reefer madness.
I like
You know,
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
one thing about the other point there about that Pamela pointed up is that sometimes you can advertise. Some marketplaces do allow it, right? So it is kind of dependent on which authority having jurisdiction it is about how much advertising can be, shown. In some places such as Colorado, you can have billboards.
Yeah. We have billboards in PA as well.
But in Canada, no,
Mm.
right? So it really depends on where you are and how you can communicate to your consumer.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's very challenging for the CPG community who is, got these huge marketing teams, market research teams that typically, their goal is to try to find ways to communicate these ideas, especially when you do have to educate consumers. Martha, you have something you want to say?
Just to build on Darwin's point, when, we talk a lot in the Canadian market about Health Canada being a hurdle to R&D, and these regulations that they have are too restrictive, and on and on and on. But for the ASTM meeting the other day, I had to go back to what's Health Canada's purpose for this, right? Like, why are they using this symbol? Because we were talking about symbols there. But Health Canada, or the government of Canada, in legalization wasn't doing it to build an industry or to help you build an industry or to help you do R&D even. It was trying to squash the black market. So, I mean, they say very clearly in their mission that we're doing this in order to create a restrictive marketplace, but a legal one for cannabis. So I think to Darwin's
That's a really good point.
Yeah, and I hadn't read, I guess I just didn't register of what that meant because I wasn't so deeply into thinking about cannabis at the time. But it kind of hit me then that, okay, no, it's very clear what they're doing. And how clear is that to the public too, right? That this isn't intended to be your free hall pass to go smoke as much weed and, take as much oil as you want kind of thing. But to give
So what are
those who
some of these
using
restrictions? So when we talk about the restrictions that Health Canada or the FDA or, just all the compliance issues that we're facing, if everybody could sort of weigh in some of the restrictions that you've encountered.
Sure, I'll start. Just very matter of factly, for example, within the US, as you're trying to do a representative, let's say, test, just the different regulations, let's say, per state is extremely restrictive. Where was the product produced? How can we distribute it? That might right there be a complete barrier for you to do the research in a way that is ultimately the best way to do research. So it's really having to have a resource that you can lean on that's going to help you get over those hurdles and know that there's going to be roadblocks, there's going to be barriers in terms of regulations, in terms of potentially, say, approvals that are needed, but just really being patient and taking the time to figure it out. Because I think in consumer research, I'm speaking about specifically, it is such a brand new thing, and we're constantly learning every single day new things that we have to tackle and get creative with about how to potentially do this in the right way, but be creative about it.
Palmina.
I think, so thank you, Michelle. I think the ultimate goal here is that, yes, we have to do everything to make sure that people are staying safe and that we're being responsible at how we do things, especially as a CPG. However, I think for me, the biggest hurdle is not being able to ask about effects here in Canada. And I think ultimately, in order to put forward a product that is going to compete with the black market, that is going to be safe and is going to be, you know, give value to the consumer, we need to understand what the effects are, how does it smoke, these types of things, which there's definitely roadblocks there. So as long as I feel like as long as you're responsible in the manner in which you do these things, they should be able to be asked.
Absolutely. You go,
I
Dawn.
just want to continue this, Palmina, because you actually touch a very important point in consumer testing. And obviously in Canada, we have a better situation than in the States, because in Canada, we have this, it's legal, but obviously we have to follow certain very strict regulation in terms of how many, in terms of product. Obviously, we have to get the license first. And if you have time and a team, you can get the license. We are lucky we have the license. But then you have to have a place in the company, dedicated place, and in terms of, and this is with a separate entrance, and then the storage of the products, and disposal of the products, and then all kinds of safety requirements for consumers. So these are a typical challenges which can be easily overcome, and we do. However, the question is, what is the most important insights right now when we test with cannabis product? Because from my perspective, I think quality control, and this could be done with trained panel, and we do have a few studies we completed, basically looking at the shelf life of flowers and pre-rolls, how they changes, how changing during the shelf life, then the terpenes profile, whether they are stable or going, weaker over time. This is an excellent application of trained panel. However, when we think about THC and consumers, the question is, what kind of question we want, insights we want to get? Do we want to get insights related to intoxication, the high? And
because there isn't a very good definition of that either.
Yeah, but exactly. And then when we test alcohol, we don't ask how drunk you are. It's irrelevant, right? So we, as a community, we have to agree on the insights we want to establish and provide to our clients. And on the other side, the strong variability within consumer to consumers, different potencies, variability in potencies, and then different tolerances, and the fact that this
a lot of individual differences,
a lot of questions to be
absolutely
answered before we actually establish a protocol, right?
Yeah. And Darwin, you had something you wanted to add as well.
Yeah, I just think it's what Yogota is pointing out is really interesting, right? Especially because both Pamina and Yogota are in Canada. And again, as you've and Martha, what you pointed out, what we kind of discussed in our preliminary meeting, right, is that Canada is trying to squash the black market. That's their goal, right? They're not looking to necessarily promote the industry by allowing operators a mechanism for attracting new consumers, right? You are not able to do marketing and advertising the way you can, say, in Colorado, California, Pennsylvania, et cetera, right? So in those marketplaces where you can advertise more direct to consumer, your sensory analysis testing, your user experience testing, your consumer surveys that you would establish or create are significantly different, or that data you want to glean from those assessments, right, are different than what you would want to do in Canada, which is much more restricted to informational. Right, I can build a army of data, IP, effectively around how my products change over time. I can use that to inform the largest buyer of products here in Canada, the OCS, more about the products and how we as an operator have great quality control in place and have in all this stability testing data that show that our vape cartridges are awesome, all this leachability data that shows they aren't going to hurt the consumer, but we can't tell the consumer that.
Right.
And I love the question that you go to Afrik, what insights do we want? And I think that we're focusing a lot on actually testing product, but there's definitely attention that needs to be paid prior to product even being developed, right? Real foundational type of research with, again, both users of the product, but also non-users, and thinking about some products that, well, let's call them non-intoxicating, but still cannabis products. What are people expecting out of this? What do they want? I find that the market is a bit of a get to market fast and not
100%.
with what the consumer really wants and needs. And I think just giving an ear to the consumer is what I would really love to see this industry do. It's exploding. It's really important to not dismiss without product testing, just that real foundational exploration.
I definitely want to touch back on that, but I also want to address Palmina has a thought as well.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I was just going to say that to the points of like, okay, Canada's trying to do it, you know, they have a one goal, but I mean, it's pretty naive to think that, we're not going to try to make money off of it kind of thing. Right. So it's also, I mean, industry is going to be a byproduct of this legalization. So there needs to be somebody.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that being able to communicate and understand the consumer a little bit better is definitely, that's something that still needs to happen. And I will say also, I'm sorry, Michelle, if I'm running long here, but I will say also that currently the consumers, as it's uneducated, the consumer just wants new genetics every 6 months.
Right.
And again, that in itself, is a challenge, because again, you're not able to do the R&D the way one would want, and based on the limitations that Health Canada is putting forward. And finally, the OCS itself, who is, to Darren's point, are the biggest purchaser of products, does want, what do the effects look like? What are these types of things? They want as much information as you can provide them for the website, which is sort of really goes against what Health Canada is saying. So it's a very difficult path to navigate.
I'm often extremely surprised with how, when we're thinking about testing, right, oftentimes novel people in the industry, right, they have not maybe launched products yet, but think, oh, Canada, easy, it's legal there, right? This should be the easiest market, we'll just do testing. Right. And then you say, okay, well, you can't really ask anything that's really insightful. I think it's this huge, I think there's a misperception that Canada, just because of the legalization, is an extremely easy market to test in. But like, as you go to, you've mentioned, right, the licenses, the restrictions, and the types of questions that you can even ask. And it's just, it's almost backwards of how you would think it would be. So, sorry.
Okay, some last thoughts on this before I want to move into a little bit more of the business side. So I think Yagoda and Martha, you both have your hands up. Oh,
Yagoda, go ahead.
Oh, I just forgot to.
Oh, okay, no worries. Martha, you go ahead.
Martha, you go ahead.
You're just keeping perpetually up.
On the both on the consumer and on the researcher side, arguably the most important insight is the effect,
Mhm.
right? Like
You're doing it.
that's what we're using it
Yeah.
for. So
And
the
that
one
actually
thing that
ties
you want,
into a
yeah,
comment that someone has on the Q&A. It's saying that they were looking into it for their dog when their dog, started chemotherapy. And so we know that there are these beneficial effects. So then a question I guess I would throw to you guys, since this is kind of the topic, is being able to measure those effects, because that's what people, to Allison's point about what are people looking for, they're looking for the things that they've read about when they're going to try to help their child or help their dog or help their own anxiety, their sleep issues. So how are they supposed to navigate that?
well, just to that point, even like, yeah, with different flower, you get different effects. I
Right.
want to know if this flower is going to provide that, right? Like
Mhm.
with the individual variation, everything else, there's kind of, there's the rough normal average that people perceive from these things. Yeah, why wouldn't we want that, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yagoda.
The question is whether, because it sounds for me like a clinical rather than recreational study testing, right? And obviously people can make a decision and themselves and take the risk and take these products. But when we think about the formal clinical study, there are even more barriers for this kind of study, and starting with the application, administrations, location of the time involved. I mean, in order to conclude something valuable, there needs to be time, and
Right.
if
Yeah.
right now there
And
is
proper
no
research.
proper research, right? And obviously funds for this kind of
Yes. And the funds
long.
is a big issue, especially, I'm going to hop over to Darwin and his thoughts, because I really do like how Darwin's discussed it as being similar to the microbrews, where you do have a lot of these smaller companies come in, and they're maybe less concerned with, some of these larger questions that we've always dealt with in CPG, right? In established consumer product companies. Darwin, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was going to say the same thing that Yoga did in regards to it, how to the point earlier, right? That with alcohol, we don't ask you, what type of drunk did you just get, right? Because that's subjective and
Yeah.
completely dependent on a consumer's tolerance and their biochemistry, etc. Right? We want to know: did you enjoy the taste? And all the other things, right, that you would want to glean from a consumer product category, right? In this case, I definitely think those type of effects. How do you feel? What's the reaction? What type of high and or what medicinal benefit did you get? Those are clinical trial based things that are off of a design or a formulated good where you could hopefully get reproducible results. As with a natural product, right? Variance occurs. It's going to be really hard to have strain A, batch A,
That is a huge
be the
complication.
same as strain A, batch B, right? When you're talking about a user experience and what type of high they may have gotten. And what I was alluding to before in regards to kind of the microbrew, right, is that you've got your local area, a brewery, you have that you're either supporting someone local because they're a friend, or you happen to try, that beer that day or whatever it is, and you really, really liked it. And maybe this particular group focuses on a type of beer, a segment of that product category that you really like. You brought up IPA. So maybe they make a particularly good IPA for whatever reason, right? And that attracts you to it because of it tastes really great. It has, it's priced right, for instance, and it's local. It's right down the street. That might be, another thing that encourage,
Right.
drives your purchasing choice. And that's where I think where we'll start to see the market evolve to when we get a little bit more flexibility in regards to how we can market and advertise things. That said, I think we'll see it like beer, alcohol, and tobacco going forward, right? You're still not going to see advertisements in the way that we did, right, when Joe Camel and the Marlboro Man were common features.
And that's an interesting, what you're talking about here with that experience people have with something local is a question that someone was asking as well. How do you communicate an experience? How do you differentiate different companies when you're not able to communicate some things?
Michelle, can I just, sorry, can I just jump in before I forget on, so we're talking about effects being, should it be clinical or not?
Yeah.
And this is totally, I'm being devil's advocate because I love clinical studies. I love the control. I love all of that. So if I can do a clinical study over, a consumer one, I will. But these effects that we're talking about that, we want to get a read on as well, we ask these of all kinds of other products. We ask them about hair products, perfume, lotions, tampons,
have actives in them,
everything, right? And if you think about botanicals, we're asking these questions there. Right. We want that effect. It's not a clinical.
That is something I wanted to ask as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Like it's not
100%.
I think a lot of companies would really balk and be concerned when you start bringing up clinical studies. And sorry, Palmina, maybe we can evolve.
No, you're fine.
The topic a little bit into this. We do have questions that are very specific here around the restrictions in consumer testing, whether it's CBD with or without THC. When you have edibles, what are the restrictions? What are the IRB limitations you have to deal with? Do you need an IRB? Can you even test these products if it has an active in it? Can you do that consumer test? And it sounds like there are some heavy restrictions in Canada in that the facility testing has to have a special license to even be able to test. And then you're restricted on the type of questions that you can ask in that test. It is different in the US. It is different in the EU and in the UK. Maybe you guys can talk a little bit about these very specific limitations and what you have to do.
Yeah, so I can, I was actually going to lead right into what I was going to say. So perfect. So we actually have a human and animal research group that does a ton of clinical research on like minor cannabinoids, terpenes, et cetera, like real life testing. Then I think the difference is asking the question of perceived effects versus actual effects that you're going to measure in a clinical setting. I also think that I think one of my colleagues puts it really great that you're driving and you're lane in your highway, and THC is going to get you the speed or you're driving at, but your terpenes are going to help you switch the lanes, right? So that's how the effects sort of work. And so how can you measure those and how can you understand those is sort of the key. Now, to your point, Michelle, in Canada here, you can't ask what the effect is, or you can't ask certain questions. You can toe the line, if you will, and ask feelings, fine. In the US, however, the restriction there is, I can't ask about my flower, right? Which again is like 80% of our sales. Like it's still the #1 used method of, consumption. So the limitation, so in the US, I can ask whatever I want, but I can't test flower. In Canada, I can test flower, but I can't ask what I want. So, so you're left trying to like, do you smoke it in Canada and run across the border? And
which we've joked about that.
We've joked about international waters.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in Niagara right now.
Do you need an IRB or do you not need an IRB? Is it a clinical study or is it not? I think these are some basic questions I would like you guys to try to answer.
I think
most often we do need IRB.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Safety of our
100%.
For us as well. So IRB is a standard in Canada, but I just want to also comment what Palmina said. And Obviously, people want to know about the effects of THC. That's important for users to know, but measuring it, it's really like measuring emotions, because it's very, very individual based and
Subjective.
and do we have a good tool to measure this effect?
Well, Martha and I have talked about that quite a bit, that having, a sort of personal reference scale where, have 0 to 100, most strongest ever and, imperceivable, where people can put it where they like, much like a pain scale, right? Again, very similar to that, because these experiences are subjective, but that's important because people do have individual differences. Darwin, you wanted to add something as well?
Yeah, I was just going to comment in regards to, is it a clinical trial or is it just a user experience assessment, right? I think that really comes down to the intent of the data.
Yeah.
What are you going to use it for, right? Are you trying to make a claim related to your product? Then maybe you should be leaning more towards clinical trial type of environment to collect the data, right? You need to collect it in a certain way so that that data has value, so that it, people can believe, right, that the data wasn't biased in any way, right? So you need to develop a study, etc. All of that would go into a user experience assessment, but perhaps the robustness, right, of that data isn't necessarily as needed. It doesn't need to be there because you're not going to make a claim about the product, right? Instead, you're using that as a features and benefits breakdown of your product for a brochure or for a bud tender to be able to explain really quickly, or for your sales team.
Or really just when you're thinking about product development, right? When you're looking at effects and you're putting it together with the form of the product, the flavors that you're including with it, say if it's an edible, all of the colors that you have in the packaging, all those things add up to a consumer experience, which is what we typically do in consumer research. We think about all these aspects and how it adds up to an overall experience that we're trying to create. And so in that consumer research, we are trying to assess like how those things fit together. But that's not necessarily like a clinical effects study, right? And I think that's where there's a little bit of confusion there. Palmina, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to, to that point, I just want to also, something that Darwin brought up, but there's no such thing as brand to a certain degree with cannabis. Nobody knows brand, right? A handful of brands, if our brand, sure, Tweed, okay. But there's very little brand loyalty, very little brand understanding, and standard identities as well. Like, I sell Blue Dream, the person down the street sells Blue Dream. What does that mean? So I think that, and Yoga brought up the quality point earlier, but there's so much variability in the industry. And I think that these are just important things to note.
But as large CPG companies start moving into the space and including it in their already established products, that might change, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Martha.
Yeah, right. You have a lot more control of what you put in a vape device than you do in flour. So yeah, right.
Or a toothpaste, right?
Exactly.
Or a shampoo.
Yeah, depending on what you're doing. Just on the clinical versus non-clinical, the way that in my mind, I differentiate it is there an invasive measure, right? If there's something that I need to collect from you that is going to go off and be analyzed by another laboratory, in my mind, that's a pretty strict clinical. Everything else, there's just the gray zone. And I think until
nobody wants to hear.
Until enough organizations are like pushing Health Canada to go, let us either do consumer research and get people out of the black market with products that they can repeatably rely on because the testing is there, the quality is there because they've had the time and they're allowed to ask the questions. I have MS. If I want products for MS, I want you to show me that they work in MS patients.
Absolutely.
Those are
That's
clinical.
a really important point.
You're going after, right? You're going after a patient
effectiveness.
population. not just relaxation.
Yeah.
Okay, relaxation. This is something we can work with more generally on the consumer side, right?
Mhm.
But if you tell me this is going to stop muscle spasms, it better stop muscle spasms. And I want to see on the information pamphlet and how many, you know,
An
and what
actual claim.
percentage.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Allison, if you could weigh
Yeah.
in here as well.
Yeah, Martha, exactly right. What's the endpoint of interest? And I think a lot of this also has to do with who is developing these products. What does their internal regulatory, what does their internal legal team direct? I have found that they have sometimes have very different from company to company
Yeah.
about, I don't want to say how much risk they're willing to take on, but what is their stance on whether something is clinical or not?
Yeah.
And also just bring to the table that the amount of THC within a product changes everything too, right? Is it under 0.02% or whatever it may be? It does change things, right? It makes it a lot easier. Let's say if we're talking about, let's just call it, you know, a CBD product versus a product that contains THC. It changes things a lot easier, obviously, with just CBD because. And then in the IRB perspective as well, it's still a bit, right? There's been academic studies, but when we're talking about a consumer company that's doing, let's say, consumer research within this space, it's very, very new. There's been a lot of different types of experiences that aren't necessarily consistent from one to the other. And it's just, we're very early here. And there's not a standard necessarily set.
Go ahead.
I think you make a great point, Allison. I think we need to continue to challenge Health Canada to say, like, we're being very responsible about how we're proceeding with these types of testings, or with our R&D, with our innovation, et cetera, et cetera. The other point I was going to bring up was that we're actually even restricted in the manner in which we can test. So for instance, we can do a CLT, but a home use test is off the table, which arguably is a lot safer because you're doing it in the comfort of your own home, right? So it's, there's a lot of red tape to work through. We continue to push, push the boundaries, and along with other colleagues. But from our company, or our corporation in particular, we're very, very strict. Like, we are mini Health Canada built in the walls of our company.
Yeah, and you need to be, right?
Right. I mean, I think that there's times where you can take risks, but ultimately we were very risk averse because we do very, very much care about the consumer's health.
Mm-hmm. Which may be different with some of the startups, right? Smaller companies. Yeah.
I think startups will ultimately, a couple of things about micros is that, one, they're probably pushing this incessant need for continuously new genetics because they're making small batches and they're bringing out new genetics every time. Sorry, Martha, I don't mean to take over your time, but and secondly, they are tasting their product. They are doing their due diligence. They are making sure that they're putting a good product out there. So even though they are small, they are considering the consumer.
Okay, let's quickly, Darwin, if you can go ahead with, and then I want to answer some of these questions people are asking. People have some very specific questions, so I'm going to make sure we get to some of those.
Yeah, absolutely, of course. No, I was just going to bounce off of what Allison had mentioned. I think it kind of goes back to maybe one or two of the previous webinars we did and described kind of the maturity level of the marketplace, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's doing consumer surveys and user experience analyses? Who's doing that and why? And I think, obviously on the THC side of things, it's a little more cumbersome, it's difficult, and it's also kind of nuanced why you're doing it, right? On the CBD side, especially in the marketplaces that allow you to sell CBD products that can be classified, marketed, and labeled as hemp, then you get it's a little easier for you to do the normal, typical, consumer packaged goods testing, get the data that you want, and then create a marketing campaign to target a certain consumer demographic to say, push your CBD bath rub. Or shampoo or whatever it may be. So I just point out the nuances there, right, in regards to which cannabinoid is in your product, and if it can be classified as hemp or not, might allow you to do consumer surveys a little easier.
That is the question of the day. I think, especially we have an attendee that's asking that question, right? Which is, they literally want to know, I've got a gummy. can I test consumers with it? Can I give the gummy to a consumer and ask them anything I want in any state within the US? Very specific question.
I think there's 20 questions to be asked back to that
Yeah,
person,
yeah.
because it is just so complex. It's not just a yes or no answer. There's so many things that need to be clarified about that. And then what do you want to talk about? Or what's the endpoint of interest? What do you want to achieve? Like, just so many questions back first. It's
So it's like, it depends, which is always our
love that answer. Love that answer. It depends. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I would say it's a hard yes if it's can be classified as hemp. So if it has
In the
in the US,
In the US.
if the
in the
product
US
has
specifically, yeah.
less than 0.3% Delta 9 THC in it on the federal level, that product can be classified as hemp. And then, yeah, give it to whoever you want. Have fun.
Absolutely.
But you might want to have some really good liability insurance lined up.
Yeah, and really think about how you're doing your design.
Yep.
So in the US,
EYA.
according to the FDA, it is illegal to market unapproved CBD products claiming to treat medical conditions. Is there a concern that certain claims about a product would fall under the umbrella of medical condition claims? So this is a problem that I think even lotions experience to some point. When you make a claim that is psychological or medical in nature, you do have to deal with this a bit, but is a relaxing CBD product that helps you to sleep violate FDA regulations?
Yes.
That's the short answer, right?
Yeah, that is the short answer.
Yeah,
right?
you can't. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a gray area, even like I said, for shampoo. When you make a claim, a medical claim, you are at risk, right?
Any claim.
Yeah.
Any claim.
Yeah, any claim. That's true.
Yeah, the
Any
bottom of it. But
any
yeah.
link to a website that makes claims.
Yeah.
Any link to a opinion poll of mothers claim. Like, it's really nuanced, and that's actually why a lot of the warning letters, again in the United States, from the FDA have been specifically related to actually indirect, like not some of the brazen ones. It's on their website. It's really clear they didn't do any homework.
Yeah.
The others, it's because it's indirect. They got snagged because someone else said, hey, this can do this. I like their product, and they didn't take it down.
That's okay, Palmina. A couple quick questions before I'm going to have each of you, being respectful of time, to talk about the future. Really quick, thoughts on OCS using the terms indica and sativa. Will that phase out? I feel like that's a question for Palmina.
So I was in our pre-talk, I think I mentioned a website that it's really funny, and they have these t-shirts saying sativa and indica is lazy marketing, and couldn't agree more. We know genetically it holds no water because they've been interbred, and the generation after generation, it just doesn't mean anything. Yet it's still perpetuated as an easy way to say, well, this makes you more calm, this makes you more whatever. I do think as we move forward and consumers become more educated, they understand the market more and more and more, we become more sophisticated. I think that'll definitely go the way of the dodo. Like, it's going to be gone, and we'll start to talk more about terpenes and minor cannabinoids that really arguably are the bigger effects generators, if you will. I mean, obviously apart from CBD and THC. So I do think that we will move away from that for sure. It's just going to take time, just like this high THC and incessant need for new genetics. I think that will start to move away. If you look at more mature markets like a Colorado and California, they're definitely moving away from that high THC trend and from that sativa indica. They're more on a balanced CBD, THC, microdosing, low doses. These types of things are all stuff that are starting to really drive the market in California in particular. So it just, that's going to start to move its way north in the next couple of years.
Real quick, Darwin and Martha, because we are up on the hour, a little past. So go ahead, Darwin.
Yeah, I saw that. I was just maybe selfless ploy for the ASTM International. I forget who it was, Yogada, I believe it might have been you, in regards to what tools do we have, right, to do these assessments. I encourage anyone on this call who is interested in this topic to please look into ASTM International's D37, D as in Douglas, 37 on cannabis, which is the technical committee creating standards in this area, and help us create those tools for the marketplace to use.
That's really important.
Really hard. So yeah, help.
Yeah. Martha,
It's
your thing that you wanted to add?
Oh, now I forgot. Oh, no, I remember. And it's appropriate too for exactly that. I think THC is getting a bad name. I may be alone in this kind of outlier thinking, but it has great utility. And not just to get you high, like I can't kill a migraine with CBD, but if I get the right THC combination strain, I can do it. So I think there's a lot of, we're starting to, it's the new reefer madness, exactly what Darwin said. Yeah.
So with that, I want to go around the group just to have you answer the question of what do you want to see in the future for this field? So Martha, since you were already talking, let's go with you. Martha, what do you want to see in the future for consumer cannabis?
As a consumer, I would like to see consistency between what is a strain, some sort of definition that we can all agree to that is between producers. I know that's a pipe dream of the biggest. Otherwise, I want clear results for medical claims. That's, I think, really important for all consumers.
Absolutely. You go to
research. I would like to be able to do everything. So we need to go offshore for that, I think.
You go to, what would you like to see?
I think I would like to see a better quality control, a better consistency in the products, and possibly like possibly a very low dosage of THC beverage, like a social product. So this could be
like cocktails.
That's right.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Darwin, what would you like to see?
Well, I mean, as I said before, I'm an advocate for a one plant solution. So I would just like to see this stigma about talking about cannabis and its parts and its products as cannabis as a whole just alleviated. Just that weight on everybody's chests when we're talking about it. Let's just lift that.
Absolutely.
Let me just piggyback off of that, because I would like to see the same thing. We know it exists. I think we're going to get there through just educating the consumer, understanding what their current perceptions are, their hurdles are, and how we can achieve that through education, through products, and just as an industry, getting more information and the correct information out there, because yes, Martha gets a bad name. And I think I would like to see with just in consumer research, there just be really clear guidelines about, and better knowledge for folks, not necessarily with this being their entire space. So let's say IRBs or whoever it may be, very clear guidelines on what can and cannot be done.
And Palmina, if you want to let us know your thoughts as well.
Yeah, so two things. One is to have that direct linkage or the direct discussion, frank discussion with the consumer. I think that for us as a CPG would be key. And secondly is opportunity for occasion. I mean, maybe it's an extreme example, but you go to a club, you can grab a beer or any kind of mixed drink in your hand. Like, is there going to be an opportunity someday to have a CBD, THC beverage while you're enjoying some music, dancing, whatever? So different occasions, different opportunities that, to Darwin and Allison's point, that we're not going to have that stigma associated with it.
Absolutely. Well,
Yes,
I want to.
We must be proud stoners.
Yes,
That's
proud.
the key.
So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, the panelists, the participants. I think we could go on for a lot more. There's a lot of topics we wanted to talk about that we didn't get a chance to. So maybe what we can do is have follow-ups with each of you. I'd love to invite you to our vidcast so we can maybe go a little more into depth with some of the answers that you've had, because I think each one of the answers you had could be, we could dive further into each one of those. And so special thanks to everybody. Please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll do our best to maybe direct those questions to the different panelists and go from there. But special thanks. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. And thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
You.
Thanks so much.